Well, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate folks taking time out of their busy schedule to join us for today's virtual learning session on expanding pathways to jobs in broadband and water sectors. I am so glad to be able to be doing this event in partnership with Texas Rural Funders, the Texas Business Leadership Council, and the Texas Water Foundation. Before I get too far ahead, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ashley Harris with United Ways of Texas. We're the state association representing Texas United Ways. And what inspired me and the partners on that are co-hosting with me today to come together is we know that broadband and water careers touch all of our work. They matter for rural communities, for employers who need skilled workers, and for our state's long-term plans to keep our water and water and digital connectivity infrastructure strong. And also I want to add from, that United Ways of Texas perspective, as all of us kind of approach and focus on different areas, we really believe that by working together with partners like those co-hosting with me today, that we can also better connect community organizations, training providers, and industry, bringing them together to ensure that more families, those in particular that have historically kind of been left out of opportunities for economic mobility, by bringing us all together in our diverse voices, that we can really ensure that all Texans have access to these important opportunities. And I just kind of want to, before we dive in further, just want to say that today, you're going to hear from, a variety of experts and stakeholders about real models on the ground, the opportunities and challenges in these sectors, and how nonprofits and local partners can bridge communities, training providers, and employers. That's why we really wanted to encourage our nonprofit partners and other stakeholders to join this call. And for those who are maybe joining, this is a first learning session for you, just a couple housekeeping. Know that this is going to be recorded. I know many partners were unable to join us today, but wanted to get the information, and we will send the recording, slides, and any key links and resources mentioned on today's call as a follow-up to this event. Also, we encourage questions. Please use the chat feature, and we're going to have some dedicated time for Q&A where folks can come off mute and be able to ask questions. But before I pass it on to our other speakers today, I would love for everyone, if you could, in the chat box, share with us your name, organization, and maybe the role that you play at your organization. Give folks some time to do that in the chat box. For those who are joining us, encourage folks to share their name and organization with us. Some folks adding. Great. So glad to see some different voices, diverse voices joining us today. All right. Now, I always have to ask, a question to get to know maybe where you're at on topics and issues whenever we do learning sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and try this. I might be unsuccessful, so my apologies in advance, but I would love everyone to think about how involved your organization is in workforce development for these sectors, for water and broadband careers. So I'm going to launch this poll now. So if folks could respond, how involved is your organization in workforce development for water or broadband careers? Very involved, somewhat involved, or just learning and exploring, or not involved at all? We're going to give folks a few more seconds to respond. I see a lot of responses coming in. All right, let's see what those results look like. So kind of a little all over the place, right? Am I seeing that, co-host, looking at it? A lot of those of us who are just learning. I know I am still learning these sectors and this topic, especially as it relates to family financial stability. So glad that we have a variety of kind of expertise, connection to this topic and to these issues, and we'll try and hopefully everyone can take away some new information today. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So I'm now going to pass it on to my other partners and my other co-host, Kelly. If she's going to kind of start us off and talking about the why of this, because I think that is so critical before we can really dive into the strategies. So Kelly.
Hello, good afternoon. Just to introduce myself first, my name is Kelly Kieschnick. I'm the Vice President of Policy at the Texas Business Leadership Council. We're a statewide, nonpartisan network of CEOs and business leaders that are focused on policies to support a more globally competitive Texas. And workforce and infrastructure are some of those critical policies that we support. So if we want to move to the next slide. Wanted to highlight some of the big investments that have happened. The state has made unprecedented investments in both water and broadband infrastructure over the last few years. In the 88th legislative session, they created the Broadband Infrastructure Fund. And then most recently, in this past election earlier this month, voters passed Proposition 4 that is dedicating $1 billion per year for water, wastewater, and flood projects, and that's over the next 20 years. So a $20 billion commitment to supporting water infrastructure, which is really critical to the state. These investments aren't just focused on improving infrastructure, they're strengthening local economies and really the quality of life within our state. And they create high demand jobs across construction, operations, technology, all the things needed to support this new infrastructure. And they offer opportunities for upskilling and advancement so more Texans have the chance to move up from entry-level roles into higher wage, higher pay positions. So we can't maximize the investments that the state has made without the workforce to make this happen. Employers are going to need talent to build, operate, and maintain this expanded infrastructure. So that's really what this conversation is about today, and why you'll support in giving people these opportunities to move forward in these pathways is so critical. We need our communities to, attract this strong infrastructure, retain. This is really critical to retaining business investment for a lot of companies. Before they make economic development decisions, they're looking at the local infrastructure. They're looking at the local, whether they have that local workforce, skilled workforce to support their needs. So this is really critical to bringing more jobs and more career opportunities across Texas. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Kelly. So building on that, my name is Kelty Garby, and I'm with Texas Rural Funders. As she pointed out, water and broadband are so important to the economy. But as those of us who've been working on it for a while have started to realize, in many ways, this infrastructure is considered invisible. And I think I'll kind of highlight that with an anecdote, which is, if you think about a time when you have either gone to buy a house or rent an apartment or condo, do you check to see if there's broadband? I am guessing that you do check to see if there's broadband, but you probably don't check to see if the water is clean and what your access is to water, because in many ways, we have all had the luxury of taking for granted that you can expect to have clean water. I know that there's a number of communities across the state that have experienced exceptions to that rule. And so there's increasing awareness. And so that's why a number of us have started to think about, what do these industries need and how do we build the workforce? And so on the next slide, Ashley is going to rejoin us and talk a little bit about Alice households.
Yeah, I'll be real quick, Kelty. Just wanted folks to know, for those non-United Way partners, we kind of have a term for those those families that are working hard but still struggling to make ends meet, and those are our Alice households, asset limited, income constrained, and employed. You'll see a QR code on this slide that will take you to our Texas ALICE report, breaking down the number of families, again, that are working but still struggling to make ends meet. We really believe in, I think, is what has inspired us to be at this table and these conversations, is that ALICE workers really, while they hold many low wage, jobs, that are important, that keep our communities running, such as retail, food, caregiving, hospitality, they really are an untapped talent that not only could help address our workforce needs, but then could help ensure more families are put on that pathway to family financial security. So Kelty, I just kind of want to always recenter us on, why that this is more than just a business, case and a community case, that there's a human face and a real human impact when it comes to thinking about this, career pathways in a holistic way.
And then on the next slide, we'll hand it over to Colin from Texas Water Foundation to talk about some projections around water.
Yes, so thank you, Kelty. I'm Colin McDonald, Texas Water Foundation. We focus on water. This is one of my favorite slides for telling the story of the issue we face with water in Texas. You'll often hear Texas is growing really fast. That's accurate, but it's not very precise. There are about 12 counties in Texas that are growing really fast. There are many more counties that are actually shrinking in population. And where this becomes a particular challenge for water is that historically we've paid for water infrastructure from growing communities, and that the fees collected from developers pay for the infrastructure you already have. So as long as you keep growing, the system keeps paying for itself. But when that trend line reverses, you don't have the infrastructure in your payments to pay for the infrastructure you actually have. And where this gets really complicated is then we have this double whammy where we've had all this expansion really since the 1950s. And so these urban areas that do have had a lot of growth haven't been investing in maintaining their infrastructure. But that's further compounded when you go to the rural areas, because they not only have the shrinking populations, they don't have the base to pay for the infrastructure, they don't have the future growth, but they also have to maintain what they do have. And so this sets up a really dicey situation. And once your water goes, just like not having broadband, it's very difficult to attract new development or interest. The other aspect is these rural areas have this additional stress of competing with urban areas that can pay more for the water sources that they have. And so that's, in a nutshell, there are a lot of difficult issues facing water in Texas that are compounded by where the demand is. But that's why we want to, can we go to the next slide? I'm just going to get all the hard stuff out of the way first, right? We have this incredible growth. We don't have a growth in water supply. 50% of our water supply is going to have to come from conservation, which means we're basically going to have to learn how to we can't build our way out of a situation. We have to actually figure out how to get by with what we already have. And the going forward, it's not only this new water is going to be more expensive, but taking care of the water we do have is going to be more expensive because of the aging infrastructure. With the passage of Prop 4, that is a great incentive or a great mechanism to fund more water projects, but it is not nearly enough. It is not going to solve anywhere close to the problems. We're looking at $80 billion to meet our water infrastructure needs through 2070. Prop 4 was $20 billion. Next slide. And so what I want to highlight with this slide, this is my water bill. And the importance of this infrastructure, and why I keep hammering on it, is that if you notice on this where the two little red arrows are, those are the only two charges on my bill that actually pay for water. The rest is infrastructure and personnel that goes into the servicing, providing the water to my home. And that's where the conclusion of this is the funding for infrastructure is coming, but what we're missing are the people to actually implement that. And that's why we're here today to share about the importance of starting to build these career paths towards and pipelines towards water jobs, because they are a cornerstone of the economies both in the rural and urban areas. And then Kelsey, you want to kind of next slide for you to talk about broadband?
Yes. So there's a similar story with water and broadband. There's still millions of Texans without access to high-speed broadband. Many of those people live in rural areas, and as you all know, we need access to broadband for economic development because of all the things it lets us do. And that's not to say there are not challenges in urban areas, because there absolutely are. The idea is access, adoption, and use are kind of a three-legged stool in the broadband space. But the challenges look a little bit different in urban versus rural areas. And on the next slide, one of the things that we hear people talk about is that it's so much more expensive to take broadband to rural areas. And what this picture does is show you really why. And I will say the easiest way that it made sense for me when I started digging into this about why is it so expensive in rural areas. In urban areas, you measure customers per foot versus rural areas where it's customers per mile. And so if you think about the infrastructure that may already be in place, like if you have poles that you can attach to in an urban or area in an area where more people are already living. So there's the distance, but then the local cost factors is what kind of work needs to be done to make a community ready for broadband, and it's just more expensive in some parts of the state. And so that impacts how much you would need to charge per subscriber. And then that translates into how many years to break even. And this information comes from a group of rural broadband operators who've been extremely hardworking in getting the message out, some of whom are on the call with us today. And so I think what Colin and I want you to understand is part of making sure we have clean water and access to broadband is also making sure that we have the workforce. And, you know, there are questions about how to fill these and what it looks like by region. And so I want to see if, Colin, you want to speak to that in the water space.
Yeah, the challenge is that the water is not evenly distributed and it's never in the quantities you want where you want it. The further compounding that is that it used to be you could run you could successfully run a water utility with 500 connections, and that had basically the critical mass. But that was when the well was run by a single pump. You could collect your funds with a box on someone's porch. Now you need a laptop to run a well. There's all kinds of criteria you have to meet to do it, and that pushes the number of connections you need up to at least 1,000, if not 2,000 connections, which means if you're a small community, you just can't be financially solvent with your water utility at that scale and have to regionalize, which means it doesn't have to mean you have to connect your pipes, but it means you need to, share expertise, share general managers, share a backhoe. And those kinds of structural change are not easy to do. But it's the same deal in that there is just efficiencies in greater numbers, and that's what water is running into dramatically, especially across these rural areas that are losing population.
So I think part of the message we want to leave you with in this first section is there are challenges, but there is also big opportunity with the funding that is coming from the state and federal levels. So we are going to see both grants, build outs in different parts of the state. And so some of the labor market data that we've looked at previously didn't account for the funds that are going to be available. And so on the next slide, I think from Texas Rural Funders' perspective, we ended up in a lot of conversations with people who were subject matter experts in water and broadband, with this realization that the growth is coming. And what we realized is there was not a realization that there are great ways to build education workforce pathways in water and broadband. So there's an awareness in water and broadband that we need to fill it, but maybe not an awareness of all of the tools and partners that we have who can help us accomplish this. And so Texas Rural Funders conducted a study, and you can visit it on the QR code right there. But if we'll go to the next slide, at a high level, there's big retirements happening in water. And so we need to work to fill those jobs. And then with all the new build out that's coming in broadband, we need to not only be relying on out-of-state contractors. Next slide. So one of the questions that people ask who work in the education workforce space about high demand, high wage is, do water and broadband fill those, meet those criteria? And there are many unfilled jobs all around the state in the water space that are good jobs. And we're not giving students the information they need to go and get the degrees for those jobs. And Colin, I want to see if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, absolutely. And there is no community in the state of Texas where there's not a water job opening right now. And a lot of those jobs are open to people with high school or even they haven't quite finished high school. And they're not necessarily the best paying, but they are stable, and you are absolutely serving a crucial need for your community.
So on the next slide, you know, some of the things that came out of our report are these are stable public jobs. As Colin just pointed out, you don't necessarily need all the way through a 4-year credential, but there's a good career ladder. One of the interesting things that we found is there are skills that are portable across infrastructure jobs. So some of the things that you learned in water can actually transfer over to broadband and other infrastructure jobs. And there are examples of employers in the state who are providing wraparound support. So in some of the places where the wages are not as high, there are some really great supports and opportunities for employees to advance. So on the next slide, I think we're going to a poll, Ashley.
Great. Thanks, Kelty and Colin. Yeah, I'd love to hear as we move into hearing directly from some local leaders doing work in this area, and especially addressing some of the challenges that many, that individuals can face when it comes to accessing these job opportunities, these training opportunities. Would love to hear from the audience. Question: in your community, what is the biggest barrier residents face to accessing workforce development and training opportunities? You're only allowed to pick one, unfortunately. So think about the top barrier that you, hear day in and day out. And I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll if I can. Give me 1 second. I guess I can't launch that poll. Let's try again. One more time, and then I'll go back to the. There we go. I'll go back to our second just a minute. All right. So back to the question. Would love to hear from folks. In your community, what is the biggest barrier residents face to accessing workforce development or training opportunities? Lack of affordable childcare or senior care? Is it limited transportation, unreliable internet? Kelty touched on that and the need, especially beyond just infrastructure, but digital skill building. Is it financial barriers, including tuition fees, wages, that would be lost to engage in training? Or lack of awareness? And if it's something other, we'd love to hear from you. Please write that in the chat box. Love to hear from your perspective, what is the biggest barrier residents in your community face? to accessing training opportunities. All right, I'm gonna end that poll. Let's see. Looks like lack of awareness, Kelty and Colin, is one of the biggest barriers. And I think we're gonna maybe touch on that a little bit today, how there are some opportunities out there and just folks don't know about them to get them on that pathway for training. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and Kelty, just given timing, do you think we can maybe switch back to the rest of y'all slides after our conversation today with our guest panelist?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and we're going to pass it back on to Kelty to give us a little bit more some examples. But wanted to introduce our speakers today. Joining us, we have Stephanie. Stephanie joining us and Sarah joining us to tell us about their local programs. Stephanie is the Executive Director of STTE Foundation, and Sarah is the Chief Business Development Officer for Workforce Solutions Rural Capital Area. Thank you guys so much for joining us today to kind of share specific innovations, initiatives that you guys are leading to help get folks on those career pathways that are. So with that, I'm going to just ask you guys maybe 1 or 2 questions that y'all both can answer, and then maybe have some more specific questions for you guys. So first, starting off with Stephanie, would love to just hear you tell us a little bit more about your organization and the work that you're doing to build pathways into those high demand water careers.
Yeah, absolutely, Ashley. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share the work that STT Foundation does. And for those wondering, STT stands for Success Through Technology Education Foundation. It's a really long one, but we are a nonprofit based along the U.S.-Mexico border out of El Paso, Texas, and we're focused on fueling economic mobility through innovation, education, and entrepreneurship. We believe that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not, especially in border communities. And so what we did to address that in our community was launch a pilot called Skills for Sustainability. The program was designed to close the opportunity gap by preparing residents for in-demand, future-focused careers. And I know that we'll get into the program a little bit deeper, but it was a co-design with the employers. And I think that's what made this program specifically successful. And it was a real true pathway. Every graduate was, matched with an employment opportunity. 100% of our participants were guaranteed an interview with a water company. And we were able to fill about 79 employees in the water utility.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Stephanie, so glad you could join us today. Sarah, do you mind sharing a little bit more about the work that your organization does in this space?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Reddy. I work for one of the 28 workforce boards across the state of Texas. If you are in the state of Texas, you have a workforce board that serves you. So please keep us in mind if you have any workforce needs, or if you want to cultivate some of these pipelines, your workforce board is there to serve you. We receive funding from the Department of Labor and some state funding, as well as some various foundations, and we may have a resource that we could pull on for you. So keep us in mind. I say that to sort of kick us off and review a couple of specific programs that we've used in this space, but also just to say that the workforce board's whole purpose is not to be everything to everyone. We don't have enough resources for every workforce need, but we're really good at convening the right people who need to be in the room to solve workforce problems. So if employers are grumbling and they're like, we really desperately need wastewater operators, then you can go to your workforce board and say, we need you to convene the right people in the room to solve this problem. We need to figure out where the funding can come from. We need to figure out who the trainers are going to be. We need to figure out how to get all the employers to play nicely together. And that's one of the roles that we play as workforce boards. So one of the things that we've been working on in this space is bringing people together for forums. So we host a water forum every year that's specifically about water issues in Central Texas. And we have specialists come in, we talk about workforce issues, we talk about workforce solutioning, but we also just talk about water and things that are on the legislative agenda we need to keep in mind, and ways that we can regionalize approaches, things like that. So we've been a part of helping to convene that. We're also a part of Austin's Infrastructure Academy, which is a private public sector, city involved partnership that's really trying to provide the skill and labor that we need for construction industry and also for transportation. And we run apprenticeships. That's just one tool that we use for workforce. So we are doing wastewater operator apprenticeships with our partners at the Texas Rural Water Association. We're doing CTE program development with our local ISDs. And we're also doing a ton of career exploration with our young people and our job seekers to help them know that these careers even exist. So we pride ourselves on sort of being like cradle to career. So thinking all the way down to even early childhood education and how we can shape the workforce of the future. And to the end of the career too, and how you can have meaningful careers at the end of your time in the working experience as well. A lot more to say about the resources of the Workforce Board, but I can stop there for now.
Yes, Sarah, that could be a whole day training and convening on the work of the workforce boards and each one doing, approaching workforce development in a variety of ways. So yeah, we'll dive into that a bit more. And kind of, it was great to hear, some you elevated some important things, I think, for the nonprofit partners on there, how valuable it is to the partnerships playing the convener role. Often that is a huge role that partners can play in just getting folks to the table to have these conversations. And so Stephanie, I kind of want to go back to, the poll question related to barriers. So I'm curious, the work of your organization, the pilot that y'all have done, has done incredible work in reaching historically underserved communities. And so I'm curious, what have you learned about engaging those residents who might not otherwise see themselves in these types of careers? Can you explain that a little bit more? Maybe dive into that a bit more?
Yeah, it's interesting because I had given this a lot of thought and had prepped a really great response. And then I saw the survey, the poll that was put out on what some of the barriers are. And we found really a lot of the same statistics and numbers that were on the poll. Transportation, childcare, broadband access, all of those things were barriers, but I will say awareness was the highest. So we ran three cohorts of this program. In the first cohort, we had 75 people register. And then I kind of was like, where are we putting this flyer out? How are we getting the message out? And it was very traditional we're emailing it and we're asking our nonprofit partners to post it. And that was kind of the extent of it, right? But for me, I said, the audience really is not the person who's plugged in. It's not the person who goes to community events. It's the person that's sitting at home during the daytime watching the TV and, is looking for this opportunity, is frustrated and wants to advance. And so we sought a grant aimed at increasing access and visibility. And so we only received $5,000, which, for a marketing grant, that's not a lot of money, but we took those $5,000 and ran some TV commercials during the 8 to 5 Monday schedule. And from 75 participants for cohort 1, we saw 234 for cohort 2 register for it. And so we think channeling the right audience or using the correct channels to promote it is really, really important. But also the other part that we found was interesting was cohort 1 didn't have remedial support. And so for cohort 2 and 3, we brought in, I believe we paid about $2,500 to have a remedial trainer come in. And so some of the participants signed up and wanted to do it and were looking forward to completing it and had the time to complete it, but had difficulty with reading. and writing, right? So their chance of finishing the certification was what didn't look so good. And so by investing those $2,500 for this person, they were able to get through the support to complete the certification. And I think that's one thing we didn't count on needing to have, but really change the graduation rate and then the higher rate for our program participants.
Well, it's so interesting, Stephanie, seeing reactions from those who joined the call on that. And so often, right, things you don't expect to be a challenge or a barrier come up, and it's a power of being able to be nimble as nonprofit, as other stakeholder, to be nimble. And Sarah, you talked about the value of partnership. That's where the kind of the collaborative, the partnership, you really got to lean on when things come up that you weren't quite planning or expecting for, to ensure that adults can be successful in these opportunities.
Yeah. And Ashley, I'll just add, cut me off when you're ready, but the other thing is I've seen a lot of workforce programs try to do online learning. And when you think about your audience, right, there's the issue of broadband access, but there's also a little bit of a tech knowledge curve, right? So the person who is not on a pathway, maybe is not employed, might not find it as easy to jump on a Zoom to do the online learning, or much less a learning system where they have to like go through a whole process. And so our program was in person in the evenings. And that I think also makes a difference to making sure that everyone makes it through the cohort. And then we did use some partnerships, like we did use our local workforce board to support us in the childcare. And then we had a couple of participants who did not have a vehicle and didn't have a way to get there in the evening. And we Ubered them, and we, used partners to help us provide those stipends for rideshare, so that everyone can make it. So I think it's different for every community, but I mean, the workforce partnership helped us a lot.
Absolutely. Those barriers will look vastly different, I think, probably in every community. I'm sure there's a lot of shared challenges, right, and barriers. And that's a good kind of segue to Sarah, kind of pushing it back to you to learn more about, beyond that technical training, how is rural capital area addressing those barriers, especially around transportation, childcare. I'd love to maybe hear anything around the kind of the digital literacy, digital divide challenge as well.
Yeah, well, first of all, hats off to you, Stephanie. It sounds like you guys are really employing some smart strategies and meeting the clients where they are, and being able to learn and grow. Just as a side note, this is different than your question, but it's just reminded me in listening to Stephanie that unless you have an organization that is like committed to like pursuing the pathway and pulling the people together and finding the strategies, and like it's very difficult to build a workforce pipeline of any kind. And for us as a workforce board, unfortunately, oftentimes it's the squeakiest wheel that's going to get the grease. And so if there's a small subset of an industry that has a desperate need, but we're not hearing it, and there's not someone like Stephanie who's like advocating for this particular pathway to be built, we're probably going to be paying attention to other squeakier wheels. So I wanted to say that it's important for us to have a marketing message to job seekers to show them what the role is. Yes. And it's important for us to make this problem known to all the constituents as well, and be like, this is a real problem. This is a real need. This is actually a quality job that's going to support people's well-being. It doesn't, it's not a minimum wage job. There's a growth path here. There's a way for them to grow in this industry. I think we need to cast a vision to one another as well for these roles. But anyway, side note, we as a workforce board in the state of Texas, for right now anyway, childcare funding from the state is actually funneled through the workforce board. So that means that while our budget is about $55 million for our work in Central Texas, $35 million of it is for childcare subsidies and childcare support. So that sounds like a lot of money, but it's like across 9 counties, it's really not that much money. And our wait list is extensive, but people do make it off the wait list, and we do serve thousands and thousands of families so that they can get into jobs. So, exploring your possibilities for subsidized childcare with your workforce board is a great option. And if you are a client of the workforce system, Workforce Solutions, then you also are able to receive a bunch of wraparound supports. And it could be something like a gas card to ensure that you can get to training, while you're preparing to get into the job. It could be if you need a certain certification to be able to get into the job and you just need to take a test, but you don't have money to pay for the test, we may be able to pay for that for you. It may be something like finding work clothes or work boots or tools that you need to be able to do the job. The wraparound supports are actually, we have some ability to sort of customize the provision based on the needs of the individual job seeker, all of it, with the goal of helping someone to hold down a job. So lots of great supports there. We also have resources on site in our workforce centers if someone needs access to the internet. So let's say they don't have broadband at home, but they need to apply for jobs. They need to have access to the internet. They can come into the site, into the workforce center, and have access to computers, printers, if they want to print off a resume. There may be even more access to other services in specific areas in the state based on the particular needs of the job seeker. So I don't want to undersell us, but those are a few that come to mind there that
That's
might
really-
help folks to be able to persist.
That's really helpful, Sarah, because I think many partners, nonprofit partners, maybe those even smaller kind of organizations who are just trying to meet the needs of families that are coming through their door often don't know about the access that the workforce board could get in terms of other to address those barriers. And often there's only so much the nonprofits can do. It's like being able to leverage everyone's kind of strengths and access to resources to the fullest. And it's just another example of how critical it is for us to make those connections, between systems, between providers, to be able to fill those gaps. And if y'all are able to, the workforce board can focus on maybe one significant barrier, maybe another kind of partner is taking on another challenge. That's great, Sarah. Thank you. So I know we have a little bit of time. I want to save some room and time for folks to be able to ask questions of y'all. I always encourage our Texas United Ways to think about impact, to be tracking outcomes and being able to tell the stories of their work and the impact, because we know how valuable that information is in to being able to scale good things or amend things that may not be working in policy and advocacy. Having the good data, having the stories helps inspire and influence systemic change. And so, Stephanie, I'd love to hear from you kind of are there specific outcomes, stories that stand out to you in your organization or that you're utilizing to inform future plans and expansion of such programs?
Yeah, actually, I didn't share this with you, but my nonprofit career started with United Way of El Paso County. And so I know the reporting structure and the metrics, and I think, United Way gave me the foundation that everything I do has to have a metric attached to it. But what I will say is the starting point for any pathway, it doesn't have to be in water, is that you co-design the program with an employer, right? I think too many times as a nonprofit, we perceive a need, or we perceive that if we build a really great program that somebody's going to fund it and that there's going to actually be participants in the program. And that's not how it works, right? So it's really a good donor tool to go to your corporate partners and say, what keeps you up at night, right? And oftentimes it's something related to HR. And so going with the HR team and saying, hey, are you forecasting jobs? In our instance, we went with El Paso Water and said, what keeps you up at night? And they said, well, our aging workforce, right? So we're going to have a really large group of employees that are going to start to retire, and we don't have a pipeline built up to replace them. And so that's how we came up with the certification for stormwater and for wastewater. And the agreement before we ever launched the program was a written MOU that said El Paso Water guarantees an interview for every completed certification. And then of course the committee may or may not hire them. But then we built the metrics off of the natural process of the program. So we didn't have to do a whole lot of work with qualitative surveys and how did you feel about the training, right? Like it was very driven by how many people signed up, how many finished the program, how many got their certification, how many got interviewed, and then how many got hired. And so the numbers, if you ask me, when you look at Skills for Sustainability, they tell the story. And it's really, really impressive to see that 75 people, cohort 1, signed up. 30 of them actually finished the certification. 13 of them got hired. And then as we went to cohort 2 and 3, it was 22 hired for cohort 2, so almost double. And then cohort 3 was 45 individuals hired, right? So for me, that's where the success is in those metrics. And I mean, I can't say that enough, but I think the other thing, luckily in our community, El Paso Water has a really great reputation, is well known for keeping its employees for a very long time. But we also include the water company at all of the trainings. Somebody from their team is generally at the certification sessions, which is asking a lot, right? Like to have an employee come and basically take the certification class with the participants, it's asking for a lot. But what it did is it created the confidence in the people from the time they signed up, got their certification, and got to the interview. They then had been seeing a lot of the El Paso Water employees' faces during all of their trainings. By the time they got to their interview, it felt more friendly, more familiar. It wasn't as intimidating as just walking in and, a cold interview. And so I think that really helped along the way, but that was only possible because we co-designed it and said, can you commit? Do you want to have somebody there? Because then they can also see the impact of the program happening and the way that the participants started and how they ended, right? So all of the things matter, but if you're not co-designing with an employer, it's almost like fighting an uphill battle. You can certify 100 people, but if not one of them, or maybe even if 10 of them find a job, that's great. But like, are you really doing the community justice? Is your work worth the level of effort?
Oh, Stephanie, that last statement. I mean, as a nonprofit and often we think we think we're doing something that will result in putting a family in the right way, but we may not even be setting them up for success. And how critical it is that we partner with those employers. And wow, thank you, Stephanie. Yes, if you could think about those questions, we're going to open up for questions shortly. But Sarah, I did just kind of want to throw kind of that last kind of, if you had any closing thoughts around, if there's one thing you could share or one action that nonprofits or other local partners could take this year to strengthen those pipelines, is access to those in demand, we know will be very in demand jobs. What would that be?
We have 2 regional examples, and I'll make it short because you said one, but just 2. Apprenticeship as a model, DOL registered or otherwise, has been really successful for us. It does require employers to invest on the front end with someone who doesn't yet have the experience that they're going to then require. But it means that it's a much better learning experience for the job seeker who becomes employee, and then they get the training that they need. And then oftentimes you can get funding to help support the actual training cost for the apprenticeship because it is a DOL registered apprenticeship. And there are quite a few grants right now that are funding that initiative. It's just a really great way to retain work and retain workers while having a structured training program. So love to tell you about our apprenticeship programs for these industries if you're interested. But then also we have a local high school that is offering a wastewater operator training program. And it's just because someone who worked in the high school happened to be connected to the industry. And it's not even a CTE program. It's not even a youth apprenticeship. It's just like a training they're doing over the summer for students who are interested in being able to have a viable job option when they get out. So it comprises technical training and an internship. And then if they want a job at the end, there's virtually a job waiting for them upon completion. So they're casting a vision for an industry to youth who would have never even known that this industry existed early on before they even graduate, and giving folks an opportunity to make money right out of high school without having to incur debt and get a bunch of additional training that they may not actually need for their future career. So it's a really interesting model. Pflugerville High School is doing it here in the area, and they love to talk about it. So I think that's a cool model too.
And Sarah, I can't help it that for me, that raises like how getting students on that pathway sooner could likely address some of the local hiring challenges, in particularly rural communities that we have. Like if they could see that pathway sooner, we could really kind of address a lot of the workforce challenges we see. And I think there's a win-win for both an employer when you have local hire, And, for family financial stability, where you have a community support, where the network of support there. That's I think a clear example of how we can get those students in that pathway.
I just wanted to highlight one other thing we're working on that maybe other people across the state might be interested in hearing about. We're building we found from talking to CTE directors or career advisors in high schools that they understand how to get students into higher ed programs. They know what schools to find, they know how to help them get Pell Grants. What they don't know is how to find the resource, which is those short-term training programs that get people into good entry-level jobs across industries. So we're building that tool right now so that you can have an easy search mechanism across industries to find those short-term certificate programs, apprenticeships, internships, one-year programs, associate degree programs that get you into a role immediately for those folks who are like, I'm not sure if higher ed's for me now or ever. And it could actually probably expand across the state if that's something that someone's interested in, because it is a resource that we just don't have access to at this moment.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. Well, we have a few minutes for questions, so I want to encourage folks to either use the chat box or raise your hand and I can take you off mute. And Kelsey, maybe you can help me monitor. Folks have questions
No
of our...
questions yet in the chat. Don't be shy. You have a lot of expertise on the screen here, everybody.
Okay, a couple more seconds.
I have a question for you all. So you have a variety of partners here, and the concentration is United Ways. So can you all talk about if a United Ways or another nonprofit in the community wants to tap in to something that your organization is doing, what's the best way to get involved? And then I see Charlie has a question after me.
Besides United Way of Texas, actually, El Paso, when I left United Way, I went as a independent nonprofit consultant. And so STT doesn't have a plan right now. We don't have it scheduled to run the next cohort of this. We're really don't want to overwhelm the water company with a bunch of people, because we've already employed almost 80 people for them. And so we're waiting until they say, okay, we're ready again. And we're waiting for them to call us. So, we don't want to pester them about it. We really are trying to serve a need. But in terms of like program design, I'm available if anyone wants to chat out those details and map it out. I'm good for that. And so if anyone wants to talk about their community specifically, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I would just say, the most obvious thing would be reach out to your local workforce board and start a conversation about this industry and the need to build pipelines. But in all truth, the things that really convene partners with workforce goals are employer demand and money, funding. So if United Way has an employer saying, we desperately need these roles filled, please bring the employer and yourself over to the workforce board and we can start from there. We can build something. We can find funding from the Texas Workforce Commission to help fund a training program for them. But if you don't have the employer voice, but you have funding and it's specifically for this type of pipeline training program, your workforce board may be able to conversely find the employer partner that you could build that backward with, because Stephanie's completely right. It is murder to try to start a training program without employers at the front end first. So employers, funding, let's go.
I think Charlie has a question.
He may have just been updating us about the chat box being disabled.
No, sorry, trying to unmute.
Okay, great.
Get my video going. So yes, first of all, really loved hearing a lot of the things that was said. Sarah, Stephanie, really pleased with the direction that you're going, and especially engaging the employers. To your point, if the employers feel that they're not part of the equation, then they're, you know, no matter what certificate you have, they may not engage with them and give an opportunity to interview. So kudos on that. I wanted to just offer myself as a resource. I have a lot of experience, not only being a broadband. A lot of the examples that y'all talked about were more on the water side than more so on the broadband side. So I want to throw this out there, and please reach out to me via LinkedIn, or Kelty can share my information. This last summer, I partnered with Rivera Telephone, and we worked with Los Mesteños Career Academy in the Rivera area. And we created a 4-week summer program, broadband technician training for high school kids. So it was the first time that it's ever been done. And so please feel free to reach out to Crystal Garcia with Los Mesteños. She can tell you, you know, how that went. I provided the instructor, which was a retired, you know, INR supervisor that I had, took him down to South Texas, and we have experience with that. Also, I'm part of 2 workforce development grants. Texas A&M Kingsville was awarded, or has been awarded, and official announcements are yet to come because the Broadband Development Office hasn't been ready to sign the final, you know, agreement. So wait for that announcement. But Texas A&M Kingsville is going to create a kind of a college level training program for broadband technicians. And I'm partnering with a VR technology company, and we're going to create a career exploration / high school training tool for high school kids and employees that are, you know, starting in their careers. So reach out to me. I'll be happy to share more details. We're not ready to launch because we're waiting for the Broadband Development Office, but as soon as they give us a green light, a lot more details are to come on that.
Charlie, I will reach out to you. I've already pinged a colleague to do that for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. We got time maybe for one more question before we have to let our fabulous guest speakers get back to their busy work day. All right. Well, Sarah, Stephanie, thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughtful approach to this work and your leadership on this issue. And to Charlie's point, we had 2 very water specific examples. We had another guest speaker who unfortunately couldn't join us today to speak about the broadband infrastructure stuff, but we'll make sure to include in a follow-up some more specific examples. But Sarah, Stephanie, thank you so much for your time. And if we get a lot of questions, just know I may be reaching out to you as a follow-up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so with that, Kelty, I think we're going to maybe switch back, if you don't mind, if there was anything you wanted to add to our slides. Give me 1 second to go back to our screen related to some examples in action. Any additional thoughts on this? Let me get back to it real quick.
So Ashley's pulling up the slides, and I'll just say kind of the information that they just shared was great. And one of the things we want you all to think about is what pathways look like. And so we have a slide in just a minute that shows that. And to the point that Charlie made and that we heard from both organizations, in many ways, there is an ecosystem here, and you don't want to go this alone. And so, you know, we talked a little bit about the role of high schools, but this graphic, this idea is it really takes K-12, higher ed, employers, the workforce organizations working together, getting job experience for young people or even adults who are looking to upskill or transition into new industries is challenging. But the good news is we have a lot of pieces in place. And so on the next slide, we're going to go over that one. Sorry. The examples of action, you heard from 2 of the organizations that are on this slide, or about 2 of them, the Austin Infrastructure Academy, in relation to the Rural Capital Area Workforce Board, and then the El Paso example. I want to dig into the Austin Infrastructure Academy for just a moment and say what's really interesting about that is the city leadership, the workforce board came together and looked at what are the needs of the region. and identified 5 industries where they would really need to dig in and make sure that there are enough workers to support the growth in the region. And so there's a number of components like the wraparound services such as childcare, thinking about recruitment, and everybody working together, including the community college and the other education partners. Skills for Sustainability is a really great working model of that in one region. We didn't go into detail today, but in the broadband space, Big Bend Telephone has a great working apprenticeship program in a very rural region of the state. And so I think the takeaway here is that you need an approach that works for your region, and there's different ways to think about it. But at the end of the day, it takes all of the partners working together, and you want to do it in the most efficient way possible. Next slide. And so we've already gotten a little preview of Seth, and I'm going to turn it over to Colin to talk about that in a little more detail, because this is a great program waiting for school districts who want to partner with the association that has put this together.
Yeah, thank you, Kelty. The SETH stands for Science, Engineering, Technology, and Health. It's a program developed by the Texas Association, or the Texas chapter of the American Waterworks Association. Basically, it's a program for high school students to have the approved training by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to then get their Class D license and then go work at a water treatment plant. Across Texas, it's pretty amazing. There's 372 public schools that run their own water systems. About 85 of these are high schools, which means that the school itself is responsible for maintaining its own system, and that's everything from testing to supplying the water. And the reason that's so fascinating is that it's biology, it's chemistry, it's electronics, it's the SCADA systems for running the system is highly technical and transferable. It's absolutely public health. And so it's a great, even if you're not going to stay in water, it's a great place to start, especially if you're in high school and just trying to figure out to get professional experience. And something I'm really excited in that about, because it enables that local hire and investment, which is crucial for keeping these institutions going, because they are institutions for support of the community. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the SETH program. It was mentioned in our previous one. It keeps expanding. And a quick little insight into the water world. There's a little bit of division between those who deal with water after it leaves your house versus those who deal with water when it comes to your house. But the Water Environment Association of Texas, is also developing a program, same deal. It's a bunch of videos. You have in-class room instruction. You have a certain number of hours of training. Then you get to get your Class D for wastewater. Exact same situation. Every community needs it. It's aging infrastructure. There's new advancements always happening especially for wastewater treatment right now, that are highly transferable. So it's a pretty fascinating field to get into if you're interested in science or technology or education or engineering or health. Next slide.
Were you talking about the wastewater program that's forthcoming, Colin?
Yes. So the Water Environment Association of Texas is developing its own. And I think this is a great example. The water industry as a whole has generally taken care of itself. And this is the first time they're running into such a employment issue that they are now trying to try new ways to solve it. Even the hard part for them, like the San Antonio water system, they keep training people to have their commercial driver's license, and they keep getting hired away. They're becoming kind of a community college for commercial driver's license in the greater San Antonio area. And And so the reason I was really excited to talk to this group especially is that what we had in the past isn't producing enough interest in the water industry. And we need partners across the state to help increase interest in the water careers. We need them to help build the pipelines that are specific to their local region. And we just need more diverse partners with water so that this service can be provided, because it's absolutely, despite everything I've said about infrastructure, it's workforce that is most likely going to cause your next interruption to service. And that's true in both the city, the big city that's happened here in Austin twice. After Winter Storm Uri, it wasn't that the pipes froze. I mean, the pipes did freeze and water pressure dropped, but what happened was that the guys that were on duty when the storm got really bad didn't have the training to turn on the generator. And when power went out, and that's what caused the drop in pressure, which caused the loss of service. And that's what turned a bad situation into a really bad situation, because once you lose water service, you're really looking at 12 hours before you have to leave a place. And it's those kinds of scenarios that happen all across the state, and we're seeing it more and more with this rise in boil water notices.
Thanks, Seth. Oops, I called you Seth. Thanks, Colin. So if we'll go to the opportunities slide, we just heard one example that's K-12, that's free to school districts. We heard another example that's forthcoming, that's going to be focused on higher ed and wastewater. I'm very excited that the Broadband Development Office has given grants to 7 different organizations that are developing trainings in different parts of the state. So Charlie is participating in and leading 2 of those efforts, which is very exciting. So we wanted people to know that this is forthcoming as a resource. So there will be some training being developed at the state level, but there are other things to think about. Again, back to the point of the ecosystem on the next slide. So you have these trainings being developed. There are also a set of program partnerships called RPEPs for short, which is partnerships between multiple rural school districts, and there's state funding available for this. And so the way I think about this is each one of these school districts, if they only have one career pathway right now, the idea by partnering with 1 or 2 others is to let students in the 2 school districts access each other's pathways, but also potentially develop some new ones. And so why these are on my radar and I want them on your radar is, as you think about the forthcoming broadband training, the existing water training, I would love for some of these rural school district partnerships to participate in Seth training or to partner with one of the 7 broadband training providers. Similarly, on the next slide, there's another partnership, the Tri-Agency Regional Convener Grant. So there is a designated organization in each of the 28 workforce board areas that is helping connect the dots between multiple school districts, thinking about data, where's the region going? And this is a grant from the Texas Education Agency. So for you all as nonprofits, as United Ways, these are good places to go to start the conversation and to create some synergy around education workforce partnership. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to talk about other ways to take action.
Great, thanks so much, Kelty. I'm even processing, seeing where, thinking about some particular communities where I really do see opportunities and interest to move these conversations forward. But, we did want to provide some specific ways that you guys could take action because, going back to that first polling question, this may be a new area to explore or new specific sector and workforce development that is new to your organization. And so we want to provide some just helpful things for you guys to think about. Kelty, you may need to help me with this slide.
Sure.
As you're much more familiar. You touched on some of this already. But I think hearing this information, especially for those nonprofit partners, if sharing this information out with your education and workforce employer partnerships United Ways in particular, you guys have such strong relationships with your school districts, with your corporate partners, with your employer, economic development leads in your community. Just sharing this information, I think, Kelty, right, would be a huge first step in being able to scale these opportunities for across communities. I also want to say, it's always important to use data and the networks that you've already developed or have access to help inform, to see where the gaps are, where the demand is. When we talk about wraparound services, there's a lot of data that could tell us what those barriers are to getting on strong career pathways. And so kind of leverage those sources of information to help inform the conversations that you need to have in your communities.
And I'll
Before I
add,
go to the next, you want to add anything,
Yeah.
Kelty?
so I would say, just building on Ashley's comment, you all can take steps to connect the dots. You may have a program already running in your organization that can help create a connection between some of the things you see on the screen. The other piece is, I talked briefly about how historically water and broadband jobs haven't met the high demand, high wage criteria. But there is an opportunity when working with your local workforce board to use what they call local knowledge and make sure that water and broadband are included, or at the very least not excluded, because it lets broadband and water jobs and programs be eligible for grants from the Texas Workforce Commission. So, I mean, that would be an example of both looking within to see what you have that could be useful, and then also reaching out to your partners and making sure that people know that water and broadband are a big issue.
That's great. Thanks, Kelty. Some additional things I know I wanted to put forward to nonprofits in our Texas United Ways is that, you can also take action, just as Kelty mentioned, by being that bridge between, workers, employers, and training programs. Also, I think nonprofit partners are great storytellers. You guys can share what's working in your community. You can also know the opportunities where potential funding is, to be able to bring these opportunities to your community. And more importantly, as conveners, as conveners and leads on collective impact, we know that nonprofits can really bring everyone together to ensure that everyone in their community has a fair shot at these strong career pathways. Kelty, is there anything you want to add to that before we
No additions.
wrap this up? Okay, so I know there's a few of us, some of us had to hop off the call, but I'm going to attempt to do one last poll, given all of the new nuggets of information you've learned and some inspiration, hopefully, that we've provided. Love to hear from folks of what support does your organization need to engage in workforce solutions in these sectors, and water and broadband. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the last poll. Give me 1 second. Should be launched. Question is, what support does your organization need to engage in workforce solutions in water and broadband sectors? Funding or financial resources, partnerships or networking opportunities, training or capacity building for staff? Do y'all need data, research, or best practices? Other, feel free to write in the chat box. And I know for Colin and Kelty and myself, we love to just know, we throw information at you, but how can we help you be able to move these initiatives and these priorities forward? If folks, I see responses still coming in. About a couple more seconds. Thanks, folks, for responding. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share those results, and Colin and Kelty would love your reflection to see where these are. A lot of responses regarding partnerships and networking opportunities.
I think so. Texas Rural Funders is going to present at the Workforce Board Conference in Corpus in December. One of the things we've been thinking about is reaching out to the RPEPs and doing a presentation for them. So I realize, you're either in an education vertical or a workforce vertical, or you're an employer. And sometimes it's useful to go to the watering hole where those other partners exist, just to hear what things are relevant for them. And so one, a United Ways may be a good place to bring together employers to have that conversation with K-12 higher ed, or just taking yourself to a conference. Those are a couple of my thoughts about partnerships or networking.
Yeah, I think for water especially, this is all new territory for how to address it. Historically, it just has never been an issue for how to attract, a lot of them, especially in rural areas, a lot of the people working there, it's because that's what their parents did.
Right.
And that model has some is a bit fragile. And so, yeah, what can I offer is, we know a lot of people in the water sector. So if any of this is of interest, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I would be happy to put you in contact with your local utilities or water associations.
Hey, thanks, Colin. So to close, I wanted to try and, share some takeaways I know I had, and Kelty and Colin, feel free to add to it. But I think it's really important to remember that, these infrastructure jobs are not just big policy ideas. I know it feels like that when we do so much on, policy and advocacy around these sectors, but they're real opportunities for communities and families and employers. I know from the United Way perspective, we believe with that right training and support, and addressing supportive services, that folks can move into more good family sustaining wage jobs. And for communities, I know for Colin and Kelty and others, it's ensuring more communities are connected, that water is safe. And some of the other big takeaways I had today, is that these careers are accessible. I think so often folks think that they're not, but they are, and that there are pathways that have already been built, and that we can look to other communities that have been doing this work. We don't have to start from scratch. And that's the power of, having the networking and partnership opportunities and learning opportunities. And I would say, just on, for the populations of which many nonprofits and United Way serve, that this is a real opportunity to get our low-income families, our ALICE families, on a pathway to, again, good jobs, which ultimately will strengthen families, communities, employers, and the whole state. Kelty, Colin, is there anything else you want to add before we close?
I think you summed it up really well.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for your time today. This was a first go at bringing this type of content to you guys as partners. So feel free to provide any feedback if you have questions of us. Here's our contact information. And know that we will be sharing some additional resources, the slide deck with folks who registered, and let us know how we can support you in being able to move these opportunities forward in your community. Thank you.